Hello, everyone, and welcome to Break Free B2B, where we are chatting with smart folks inside and outside of the B2B space to try and uncover some new ground and escape from the constraints of traditional business-oriented marketing strategies. My name is Nick Nelson. I'm a content strategist here at TopRank Marketing, and we're really excited to have our guest on here for today, Hal Werner. To give you a little background on Hal, he worked with TopRank on some very early influencer campaigns that we did way back before my time here. So we thought it would be fun to catch up with him today, talk a little bit about what's changed in his world, in the marketing world, and all that, and pick his brain. Hal has a really varied background. Professionally, you've done some copywriting, you've done some account management, content strategy, which of course is my heart, and also SEO and PPC, and I'm sure a lot more than that. And currently you are the Global Manager of Digital Marketing and Strategy at Mitel, correct?
That's right.
What does that job entail, and sort of how does that pull in everything that you've kind of done up to this point?
It's really kind of an evolution of a lot of the stuff I've done. I started out at Mitel as a content strategist, and at one point we realized the natural marriage between SEO and content strategy, so those things kind of meshed together. And as I got more involved in the keyword side of things, there's obviously also a meshing of SEO into PPC, just making sure that those things were effective, making sure that the traffic I was bringing in was actually generating a result. I naturally had some, involvement in usability, conversion rate optimization, those sorts of things, and so that's how I got to that sort of current title.
Yeah, it's a full blend. Over the intervening years, since we've been able to work with you, what have you kind of seen in the industry? What do you see as really the true signs of progress, from your point of view as to where we've gotten now?
Well, one of the things that I really like that I've seen about the industry for progress is the idea of sort of multi-touch, end-to-end attribution, right? Yeah. So we've got all these disparate systems, all these different kind of vendors, ads and websites and affiliates and all those things that contribute to the ecosystem. And the thing we love about digital is we can track it all. But having to track all those things separately gave you a not very complete picture. Mm-hmm. And so the more of those things we can tie together, the more actual intelligence we have that's actionable. There have been a lot of marketing technology companies over the years that have really promised that grand vision, right? Yeah. Of integrating all of the things. And a lot of them have fallen short, or the only way that they could track everything was if you used their platform for everything. Yeah. Which is an option if you can go all in on a single platform. But even if you think of something like a HubSpot, you still have to integrate that with things like a Salesforce or a Google Analytics. So it's not even really everything that's on a platform. Right. So one of the cool things I've seen is the vendors sort of like the Tableau type folks or some of the BI tools that are going in and actually collecting information and data from disparate systems via APIs that are actually starting to make good on that vision.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges that I see in that area is, when you're talking about these touches, there's sort of touches that aren't even necessarily a touch. It's almost like a proximity, how do you, someone saw an ad maybe, didn't take any action on it, but that could have very well influenced at the end of the day their decision to make a purchase. Right. What are you seeing in that front of really trying to measure that? Because I think that's really the crux right now.
Well, if you take things offline, you're always going to have some gaps. Like for something like a billboard, you don't know if someone necessarily drives by it. But as far as it goes digitally, one of the really cool things I've seen just at Mitel is our analytics team, working together with demand generation and the marketing tech stack folks and all that kind of stuff, is actually bringing those things together into a tool like Tableau to actually give us that sort of end-to-end view. And I don't want to undersell what it takes to do that, right? Because I think what a lot of companies have viewed, and frankly a lot of the vendors have pitched, is you buy the technology and your problem is solved. Right. And I'm here to tell you, having seen many marketing technologies, you solve nothing once you buy a new tool. Right. You generate more work. Yeah. And a lot of them don't work nearly as easily or seamlessly as you expect them to. So in my view, what you really have to do to make those things effective are what those teams have done at our company, is that you have to have a vision for how it's all going to work. You have to have a roadmap. You really got to know exactly which data pieces you need to be effective. One of the rules that we started using at Mitel after a while with so many marketing technology things involved was when it came to reporting, we weren't going to report on a number unless there was a specific action we believed we were going to take based on that number.
I like that.
Because there was tons of reporting. Everyone wants to know information. And we can be guilty of it too, right? We want to see data, we have questions. Yep. But that puts a lot of ad hoc sort of burden on like an analytics department or whoever has to pull that data. And so we started to get more focused about it, and we said, all right, well, we're going to pull a piece of data, or we're going to start generating a report if it's going to make a tangible change to the way we do business. If you can pull it, that's great. If not, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah.
And so I think it takes that kind of discipline, not only to know which data you're looking at to put into your roadmap, but also you really got to have the gumption to stick with the roadmap, evolve it if it needs to be, but to stick with it, because it's not an overnight process. It's taken years with a lot of the same people at the helm, right? Pushing for those same kinds of changes, often faced with delays or, budget adjustments and those sorts of things, hurdles in actually integrating the platforms and, goodness gracious, setting them up so they actually tell you what you believe, right? The configuration of a lot of these things is a very manual process. And so that's what it took for us to really start seeing stuff where we could make a tangible difference. But the awesome thing about that is once you do that, we actually had a particular data point where we noticed a certain tactic was underperforming far down the funnel. And so we were able to look at the full flow of that, pinpoint where it was falling off, and actually identify it wasn't that the tactic was bad, it wasn't that the creative was bad, it wasn't even that there was some sort of technology glitch on intaking that data, right. But there was a human factor far down the funnel where there was a person who had given direction to a group of people who had then acted on it, and then that was the fall off. And so we would never have been able to do that if we hadn't had all those disparate systems tied together and the people with the understanding, the sophisticated understanding of the business processes and the technology processes to actually be able to identify where that leak was.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're tapping into like really one of the big frontiers right now is that full measurement and sort of seeing all the angles like that. And there's definitely a shiny object syndrome going on. As you mentioned, I think there's a lot of belief that you get a tool and it's going to solve a problem, and maybe it will, but you're sort of creating a new challenge for yourselves in learning that tool and learning how to fully take advantage of it. And that's a mistake that I see, which sort of transitions us into our next topic here. What is one of the prevalent mistakes or sort of missteps that you're seeing in the industry right now that sticks out to you?
It does tie in a little bit. One of the big things I'm seeing in a lot of places is the idea that everyone wants to have ideas, but nobody wants to do them. And so you get this sort of syndrome. There was a meme I saw that was perfect. It was a construction meme, but I think it applies to all of us. There was a guy named Joe with a shovel, and there was like 6 guys standing around watching Joe dig a hole. And they all had different titles on them, right? Like supervisor of shovels, supervisors of hole shape, regional direct manager of work boots or something like that.
Supervisor. Yeah.
And then there's Joe, right? The actual guy digging the hole. And it's funny, but honestly, I don't think it's that far off. I think there's a lot of places that have marketing to where you might have a half a dozen different, well, let's say you have a dozen different strategists for different areas of marketing, right? And then you've got 2 people that actually make stuff. That's not a recipe for success for either of them. That's a recipe for failure for the people making stuff because they're always going to be overloaded. And it's a recipe for failure for the strategists who are trying to get stuff done because they're just sitting there waiting, tapping their feet like, can I get something? And by the time it's done, it's not useful anymore.
Yeah. Is there, when you see this happening, maybe in your own experience, is there something that you found that is a good way to circumvent this or overcome this sort of hurdle, which absolutely is something that I see, I think that we all see outside of even marketing. It's a major thing, sort of this over bureaucracy, overthinking, over planning, too many cooks kind of deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a stopgap to help you survive until you can get things fixed, you can do a lot about prioritization and making sure that the things you are making are all in alignment with a cohesive plan. So instead of all of those people having different stuff they need, having them have all parts of the same thing. But ultimately, I think team leaders or department leaders, whatever level it's at, have to define their organization in a way where they understand these are the functions I need and these are the positions I need. And you actually need to make sure that you have properly resourced each of the areas you want to go after. I think a lot of the time that strategy layer is taken as the given, but the doers are the afterthought. And I think you shouldn't have a strategy level until you have your minimum doers to actually execute it. It's like getting a car and not having any gas to run it, right? Right. There's no point in having 6 cars if you only have 1 tank worth of gas.
Absolutely. And one thing that I see that it seems so simple, but it's a step that gets overlooked so often is simply documenting things, having everyone's role really well defined and on paper, so you have sort of a singular truth that you can point back to. Is that something that you've sort of been trying to adhere to?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've helped a couple times look at sort of team level reorgs and that kind of stuff. One of the things that we would always do is we would break it down to roles, positions, and people. So there's kind of 3 layers, right? So a role is a specific function that needs to happen. A position could be a combination of roles, and a person could be a combination of positions. Or you might have many people for a role or many people for a position. So you not only have to understand those layers of things, you have to then combine them in a realistic way that understands what you've already got, so you can find the gaps, see what you need to fill. And then if it's not realistic to fill all of those gaps, then you're probably going to have to decide there's certain functional areas you're just going to have to let go so you can perform the other ones really well. Yeah. I'm always been a fan of doing a couple things really well and not doing a whole lot of things really poorly.
Yeah.
I think that's hopefully a shift that we can see in marketing, because I think that doing a lot, you can see it just as much in content as you do in people. We have this glut of mediocre content because people are like, I need to put out volume. Yep. And so you get all this stuff that's just taking up space. In some cases, I'd argue it's even what I would call content pollution. Yeah. You have noise pollution, you have light pollution, you have air pollution. Like, those are things where a good thing, you just have too much of it that's unwanted and it becomes a problem. I think there's just the same thing in content. I think it's legitimately content pollution that is cluttering up the ecosystem and making people blind to some of the good stuff.
Yeah, that's undeniable. I think that's a really interesting delineation you had there. Roles, positions, people, because I think a lot of people would use those terms interchangeably or for the same thing, and I myself probably would, but I think that's a good way to sort of eliminate overlap or discover gaps when you separate them out. And when it comes back to content pollution, absolutely. I mean, one thing we talk about here, a lot of TopRank is purpose, and whether that's talking about your company having a purpose beyond its business function, or even down to the granular level of every piece of content you create having a purpose. It's very easy to get caught in this shuffle or this pattern or habit of just churning things out, and you sort of fall off. So it's really good to take a step back, right, and just review and say, well, what is the purpose of this single thing we're creating?
If you want to create a piece of content about the topic, if you can't create the best one, why are you creating it? Someone's already covered that. I think it's the same way with a function in a company, right? If you don't truly believe that you can outdo your competitors in the space for that function, then what are you wasting your time on?
Yeah, absolutely. So transitioning a little bit towards looking from the past and the now into a little bit to the future, from your personal vision of where marketing in general and maybe especially B2B marketing is going forward here, what do you see happening as opposed to, if it's different, what would you like to see happen?
So it's not necessarily something I want to see happen, but there is a big trend that seems to be coming together from different pieces from some data I saw at MozCon recently. And that is this wonderful world of this sort of free information, free data, free flowing stuff is contracting and getting closed off. So one of the things that they pointed out was that Google is sending tons less organic traffic over time and redirecting it to their own properties, right? So that's one less avenue we've got. At the same conference, there were several social media touch points that showed things like Twitter and Facebook were sending dramatically less organic traffic to businesses. People are still getting it, but businesses are not. Yeah. And I'm talking sub 1% organic reach for that stuff.
Yeah.
So all these places where we sort of had this wonderful exchange of information and ideas, in the monetization of them has really turned it back into more of the old model of you got to pay to play in the audience. Mm-hmm. It's the exact same thing TV and radio does. They create a product, they get an audience, and then they sell it to advertisers. And that's exactly what these guys have done as well. Nothing wrong with monetizing it, but what it does mean is that this idea of earned is getting different. Yeah. And even in Google, one of the things we're seeing with the EAT update, authority, trust, and expertise, that's it, is that because of all the crazy fake information out there, they're now having to use other types of signals to establish your authority on a topic. And that really goes back to branding. And so when you think about these things, it's getting harder to be found in search. It's going to be harder to be found on social. What that means to me is that a lot of companies are actually going to have to go back and put a little bit more emphasis on branding, not to the detriment of these other things, but they're going to have to put emphasis on branding so that these things continue to work. If they won't necessarily find you in Google for a non-branded phrase, then you need to make sure you're on the mind for a branded phrase. Or even if it is a non-branded phrase, you need to be something that the knowledge graph associates strongly with that topic.
Right.
Which is already a little bit true, but it's becoming even more true. I think branding is going to become a big part of it, not to, like I said, not to the detriment or the exclusion of those things, but it's actually going to be instrumental in something like search to have a strong branding presence. So I think we're sort of seeing a snapback of that sort of big open era of everything, and a little bit more to these closed down systems where you're going to have people know who you are and put a persona out there.
Tactically speaking, what do you see as some sort of opportunities to push back against this trend and really firm up your brand?
Well, I think there's a couple things you can do. For one, I think we might actually see a little bit of reinvestment into some of the traditional branding channels, advertising channels to do that. I also think there may be some shift from a lot of digital channels have a really strongly sort of demand generation or e-commerce focus type deal. I think a lot of those channels you might see more usage for branding. Display is an area where some industries are already doing that. Other industries may follow a little more. But I also think one of the interesting things is one of the things you guys do is influencer marketing is if you yourself, you have your channels, but if your channels are not getting that reach, then these people in these other channels might help your brand get out there, right? Yeah. So whether you earn it or whether it's paid for, you're going to need more voices putting out there what you're about so that not only people see you, but you begin to be associated with that thing at a critical mass.
So given your background in search engine marketing, one thing I'm really curious to get your thoughts on sort of pertaining to this conversation, you know, in my day-to-day as a content strategist, is sort of that intersection between content strategy and SEO, and how I really see them becoming sort of the same thing. You know, the importance of framing it around keywords and stuff like that, as opposed to just creating quality content that is going to be satisfying user requests and keeping people on the page and clicking through, really seems to be the name of the game. Are you seeing that trend sort of play out?
Yeah, I think the most successful companies are doing that. And I think the tough thing is it's hard to operationalize.
Right.
If you have a person who understands all of those things and how they work together, and they can either do it or direct it, then you're in a good position. But if you have to just have a team of disparate people, it gets much harder. So I always like to start every project with an insight. If there's not a core insight at the beginning of your project, then I tend to not like to actually pursue it because I think it's kind of empty. And so I think those insights can come from a lot of places, and they have to kind of funnel into content and SEO. Sometimes the insight might be a keyword. You might see something on Google Trends blowing up that you can get on top of. Or it might come from the sales team, right? The people boots on the ground, front lines. Hey guys, we're always hearing people asking about this, and you can feed it in that way. And even if you do feed it in from somewhere else, then as long as before you create the content, as long as you get in with SEO, then you can marry those things together. And you might even, through your research, find out some other stuff. You might find out one topic, go plug it into a tool, and find out there's a lot of other questions people are asking to really enrich what you're going to create.
Yeah, I love those tools that let you sort of pop something in and really see the whole area around it, you know, those branches of what people are searching for. And that unlocks a lot of content ideas and a lot of successful marketing tactics, I think. When it comes down to sort of your core belief, you know, what's kind of driving you right now in the marketing world? How would you sort of summarize that?
My personal philosophy has to do with the intersection of analytics and creative. So my personal tagline, if there is such a thing, is part art, part science, all business. And so those two aspects of things are really hard to bring together. And you almost always find that companies are really good at one or the other, and that gives you good. But when I see great, it's almost always when the two are together. So you have a really good insight that's maybe based on data. You have a data-led execution, and you have a creative execution of that idea that really makes it shine. Because without either of those parts, it can fall flat a little bit. Mm-hmm. And not even flat, but just not be the rock star superhero kind of stuff.
Yeah. So if people want to get in touch with you, maybe pick your brain about marketing, hear a little more of your thoughts, or just connect, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a website at halwerner.com. You can find me on Twitter at Hal Werner. If you're really interested, I've tried to start vlogging a little bit. I'm going to call it a test.
Okay.
I'm going to call it a test, but it's there and it's fun.
Where are you vlogging?
I'm putting those straight to YouTube.
Nice. Cool. I'll have to check some of that out. That sounds great. So as we sort of tie back here to our general theme of the show, breaking free. When you look at sort of the constraints, we've talked a lot about the problems and the barriers that people are hitting. You've talked a little bit about your beliefs, your vision. How do we tie that into sort of a prescription for how marketers that are feeling a little stuck in B2B, maybe not connecting with their audience, maybe not getting the results they want? What do you see as the way to sort of break free from that?
I think the key to it really comes down to people. I think it's really easy, especially when you get into B2B or tech, to kind of lose sight of that and think of it more sort of scientifically and go, all right, well, these tools and these functions and these things. I think a lot of the issues companies have come down to not having the right people in place or not having the right type of people in place. They don't do that in a good analysis of those things we talked about, right? The functions, roles, and people, to make sure that those actually line up what they're trying to accomplish. Sometimes they don't even line out what they're trying to accomplish, right? Sometimes it's unspoken. It needs to be spoken. It needs to be written, or it's really easy to lose track of. And then finally, in executing all of that, I think it comes down to understanding how those people work together. It's the operation side of that thing and making sure you have processes for exactly how that's going to happen.
Absolutely. People. Having the right people, having great, smart people like Hal. We appreciate you coming on the show, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for
helping us all break free with B2B. I'm Nick Nelson. This is TopRank Marketing. And thanks, everyone, for listening in.